And this is an extra special Parsha for me. It's my bar mitzvah Parsha, and it's
Ah,
extra wonderful to inaugurate two new Bayit members into sharing this bar mitzvah Parsha with me. Judah Killip and Momo Rosenberg, both of whose B'nai Mitzvah will be this Shabbat. And it's really wonderful to have them in the Vayeshev club. And with Ravet Shalom to explore a methodology that I'm not sure how robust a methodology it is, other than maybe close reading, but he wants us to, as he'll explain, really try to keep tabs on the difference between what we, as the sort of omniscient reader, know and what the characters know, and to try to use that as a lens for understanding some things that are sometimes unclear in the stories that he thinks emerge from that discrepancy in awareness. But ultimately, I would say this interpretation hinges on a few assumptions that I guess the way I would say it is if the Torah made these assumptions, I think Rav Shalom would question these assumptions. But now he's going to make them. And so wearing a Rav Yitzchak Etshalom hat, I question them a little bit. But as always, I think the questions he asks are good ones. The answer he offers, you could take or leave, but they help us sharpen our our awareness of some of the challenges in the text, give us a suggestion of one possibility to consider, and certainly about how a potentially throwaway detail in a story could be read as actually a very important feature in the story. So with that introduction, let me share my screen. Okay, this is called Joseph's Dreams, Encountering the Character's World, Part 2. Our next two forays between the lines will take segments of a well-known story and reevaluate what we know about them, what we think we know about them, and what the text really tells us. There are three stories in the Parashot that cover the life of Yosef. And I already think about Lance, who in previous Parsha Shirim, we've talked about these directional movements in text. So I already anticipate your comments here. Um, Descent, chapters 37 to 41, Yosef's descent into the pit, his descent to Egypt, and ultimately his descent into the Egyptian prison. And certainly the terms of Laredet and even the term bor in two out of the three, give us a clear literary sense of that theme emerging. Ascent, that's his ascent to vice regent of Egypt. And then reunification, his reunification with his brothers and his father. The most well-known stories regarding Joseph are found in the first part of the biography, his dreams and his successful interpretation of dreams. Yet there are a number of assumptions made by the casual reader and absorbed into exegesis that miss some major turning points in the story and that shroud significant developments within the characters presented to us. We will first read the lines and then read between them and discover that much of what we thought we knew about Yosef, his father, and his brothers needs to be reevaluated. Says Rav Shalom, as I've pointed out several times in earlier chapters, to properly understand the text, to be properly surprised or impressed by anyone's actions, we must read the narrative from the point of view of each of the characters to the extent that the text, context, and external information allow. This will allow us to solve a mystery surrounding the story of Yosef, the dream interpreter. These chapters, comprising the weekly Torah portion of Parashat Vayeshev, make up the first story of the Joseph cycle. They are bookended with stories about dreams, both stories featuring Yosef as the central character. Right, in the first set, it's his own dreams, and in the second set, it's his interpretation of dreams. At the end of this story, we're told about Yosef's success in the prison of the court of Egypt and of his insightful explanation of the dreams of his two fellow prisoners. And they dreamed a dream, both of them, each man his dream in one night, each man according to the interpretation of his dream, the butler and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were bound in the prison. And Yosef came in unto them in the morning and saw them, and behold, they were sad. And he asked Paro's officers that were with him in the ward of his master's house, saying, Wherefore look ye so sad today? It's interesting that whatever translation this is chooses to interpret both descriptions as sad. The Hebrew says zoafim in the first case, and then penechem ra'im in the second case. They said unto him, We have dreamed a dream, and there is none that can interpret it. Yosef said to them, Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell them to me now. Yosef is confident about his ability to explain their dreams, and that confidence is quickly validated as each of his explanations is played out in Paro's court. The butler is restored to his position, and the baker is hanged. Where did Yosef get this confidence? Indeed, where did he get the ability to interpret dreams? The earlier dream sequence involving Yosef in the beginning of the story posits Yosef not as a dream interpreter, but rather as the dreamer. His brothers and father are the ones who make inferences from his dreams, but he just reports them. When did he learn how to explain dreams? This question carries extra significance in light of the later story of Yosef's redemption from prison. The butler finally remembers Yosef and reports his, meaning Yosef's, successful dream interpretation abilities to Paro. This leads to Yosef's rise to greatness as a result of his explanation of Paro's dreams, right? So he's building up here the point that Yosef, the dream interpreter, is a linchpin in the development of the story. But Yosef, the dream interpreter, pops up at the end of the Parsha. All we have in the beginning of the Parsha is Yosef, the dreamer. How does he shift from the first role to the second? The text never tells us, and Yosef studied dream interpretation, the most explicit version of how that development would take place. Methodological note. The reader is often surprised to find that he or she is far wiser than any of the actors about whom he or she is reading. Yet this is a point repeated many times in the text. For instance, when Yosef and his brothers meet in the next story, we know who is who. Yet the brothers are ignorant of the true identity of the regent of Egypt. We know who is who, yet the brothers are ignorant of the true identity of the regent of Egypt. Yosef is ignorant as well of the goings on back in Canaan, although we have been following that drama avidly and intimately. The astute reader of biblical narrative must always keep in mind what each of the actors knows, so far as can be discerned from the text. Strange and surprising behavior can often be explained with this as background. Conversely, conventional reactions suddenly loom as odd and disturbing when we factor in the essential compartmentalization of each character. In order to understand Yosef's ability to interpret the dreams of the butler and the baker, again, remember that was his key question from before, this shift from dreamer to dream interpreter, and then those of Paro, let's look back at the first dream sequence at the beginning of the cycle. Okay, this is from the very beginning of the Parsha. Yosef dreamed a dream and he told it to his brothers, and they hated him yet the more. We've already been told that they hated him and couldn't speak peaceably about him. But after his first dream, they hated him even the more. And he said to them, Hear now this dream which I have dreamed, for behold, we were binding sheaves in the field. And lo, my sheaf arose and also stood upright. And behold, your sheaves came round about and bowed down to my sheaf. And his brothers said to him, Will you indeed reign over us? Or will you indeed have dominion over us? And they hated him yet the more for his dreams and for his words. And he dreamed al chalomotav v'al devarav, his dreams and his words. And he dreamed yet another dream. And behold, the sun and the moon and 11 stars. Sorry, he dreamed yet another dream and told it to his brethren, and said, Behold, I have dreamed yet another dream. And behold, the sun and moon and 11 stars bowed down to me. And he told it to his father and to his brethren. And his father rebuked him and said to him, What is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall I and your mother and your brothers indeed come to bow down to you to the earth? And his brethren envied him, but his father kept the matter in mind. There are a few strange shifts between how he communicates the dreams, who he communicates them to, and Rav Echelon's going to pick up on a number of them. Yosef had two dreams, the dream of the sheaves and the dream of the stars. An in-depth study of the differences between these dreams, surely a worthy enterprise, will be taken up in a later volume. We do note, nevertheless, several significant differences in the reaction of his family members to the dreams. Resolving two questions about these reactions and one seemingly ancillary issue will help us understand Yosef's later confidence and ability as a dream interpreter. One, why did Yosef tell his brothers about his dreams? He already had a tempestuous relationship with them, and surely relating these dreams would do nothing to reverse that trend. Two, when he told them that he had the first dream, the dream of the sheaves, before informing them of the content, they hated him more than before. After he related the content of the dream, his brothers accused Yosef of plotting, or at least contemplating, a takeover of the family. After he related the second dream, the dream of the stars, they had no reaction. Note that the dream of the stars is much more impactful than the dream of the sheaves in two ways. A, not only are the stars, which might be brothers, bowing down, akin to the blessing given to Yaakov, but the sun, maybe father, and moon, maybe mother, are also bowing, right? Whereas in the first dream, it was only the sheaves of the brothers bowing down to Yosef's sheaf. Now, it includes potentially father and mother, if that's what sun and moon symbolize. And B, unlike the first dream, where their sheaves bowed to his sheaf, the second dream had the stars, sun, and moon bowing to Yosef himself. Right? So there's an intensification of the number of subservient family members and their status in the family, and the shift from kind of metaphor, complete metaphor, to partial metaphor and partial actual Yosef. Nevertheless, the brothers remained silent in response to hearing this dream, although they were jealous, right? So he's pointing out that, the first dream prompted a strong response from them. The second dream, which he's pointed out is more impactful or maybe more severe or strong in multiple ways, didn't get, we've already been told they hated him more and then even more. Here, after the second dream, it doesn't say they hated him even more, just that they were jealous. Note that he related this dream twice to his brothers and later to his father in their presence, right? It's an interesting detail of the story. It says he dreamed yet another dream told to his brethren. It said, behold, I have dreamed yet another dream. Behold, the sun and the moon, 11 stars bow down to me. And then it says, and he told it to his father and to his brethren. And his father rebuked him and said, etc. On the face of it, it really does sound like two separate recountings of the dream. Why didn't they react to the second dream either time, right? They now heard it twice, and they were quiet in both cases. The father, on the other hand, reacted, this is our third question, reacted to the second dream in the same fashion as the brother's reaction to the first dream, right? This, are you going to rule over us? Yet, he kept the matter in mind, i.e., he waited to see if it would be fulfilled. Why did Yaakov simultaneously castigate his son for this egocentric dream, indicating a dismissive attitude towards it, while, right at the same time, waiting to see if it would come to pass? Okay, so we've got our set of questions here about the strange way of relating the dreams, the strange reactions, differing reactions of the brothers, and the sort of split reaction or internally contradictory reaction of Yaakov to the second dream. Solving one other difficulty at the beginning of the Yosef narratives will set us on the path to a solution. As we are introduced to Yosef and the special relationship he had with his father, we're told, Yisrael ahavat Yosef mikol banav ki ven zukunim hu lo. Yisrael loved Yosef more than any of his other sons because he was the son of his old age. The commentators provide several opinions about the key phrase ben zukunim hu lo. He was his son of his older age. Rashi understands it as our translation indicates. Since Yosef was born to Yaakov when he was old, the fathers felt a special affection for him. Ramban challenges this interpretation on 2 points. One, Yosef was apparently born not much later than Yisachar and Zevulun, so how was he really uniquely a son of his older age? And two, the verse states that Yaakov loved Yosef more than any of his other sons. The implication is that Yaakov loved him more than Binyamin, who was born much later and when Yaakov was much older. So in what way is Yosef this unique standout Ben Zukunim, worthy of the love that seems to be based on that status when there are other brothers that might equally or more have merited that status? The second century Aramaic translation known as Onkelos translates Ben Zukunim as wise child. It's like Bar Chakima, maybe. Ramban points out the difficulty with this translation. The verse states, Ki ben Zukunim hu lo. This is a little bit of bold on lo. He was a Ben Zukunim to him, to Yaakov. If Ben Zukunim is rendered wise child, then there's no need for the possessive lo afterwards, right? We wouldn't say he was a wise child to Yaakov, if wise is a description of him, it's not in relation to any person. Clearly, the Ben Zikunim position was not an objective description. Rather, it was relational to Yaakov. Ramban then offers his own explanation. The custom of elders was to take one of their younger sons as a servant, and he would lean on him at all times, never separating from him. He would be called the son of his old age, Ben Zikunav, since he would serve him in his old age. This is what they, the rabbis, intended when they stated everything that Yaakov learned from Shem and Aver, he passed on to Yosef. That is, he transmitted to him the wisdom and secret teachings. Right? That's all midrashic. Midrash never says that Yaakov learned from Shem and Aver, and in fact, we discussed last week that the midrashic chronology and biography of Yaakov, which ascribes to him 14 years of study in the tents of Aver, we had a reading of his journey which did not include that time. Um, but if we assume that that happened, we might also assume that what Yaakov learned there, he transmitted on to Yosef. So now we see that a Ben Zikunim is not a unique title about being the youngest child or the child born when a parent is in a different older stage of life. It's a role, the one who will serve the parent when they get old. Could be the firstborn, ostensibly. Although Ramban doesn't say that. He says one of the younger sons, because presumably they'll still be more available in life as the parent ages. So maybe it wouldn't be a firstborn, but it didn't have to be specifically the youngest. Following Ramban's explanation, Yosef had every reason to see himself as the heir of the Avram Yitzchak Yaakov tradition. As the closest and most favored recipient of Yaakov's wisdom and tradition, Yosef understood that he was destined to experience some of the same events that befell his father and to have a similar relationship with God. Okay, so first kind of plank in Rav Shalom's argument here is to adopt the Ramban's approach to Ben Zikunim and say that this is a unique relationship that Yosef had with Yaakov. He seems to accept either on face value the Midrash or just the notion that Ramban is suggesting underlies the Midrash, right? The Ramban, when he quotes the Midrash, says, this is what the rabbis intended when they stated that everything Yaakov learned from Shem and Aver, he passed on to Yosef. You don't have to accept the idea that Yaakov studied in the study hall or the tents of Shem and Aver. You could just say, Ramban here is saying, the general idea is, and this is what Rav Shalom is adopting, Ramban's stance that the general idea is that this child is not just designated to serve the father as he ages, but is also a child to whom the father uniquely transmits something of their uh, values, knowledge, etc., because they're spending so much more one-on-one time together. Among our patriarchs and matriarchs, the only one who we are told had a dream was Yaakov, meaning of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah. Yaakov dreamt not once, but twice on his way out of the land and when being beckoned back. It's interesting to note that the only other two dreams recorded in Genesis before Yosef were nearly identical occasions, meaning identical to each other. God appeared to Abimelech to warn him to return Abraham's wife to her husband. God then appeared to Lavan to warn him not to attack Yaakov. These two dreams are not of a category with Yaakov's or with the three remaining couplets of dreams, Yosef's, Paro's stewards at the end of our Parsha, or Paro's at the beginning of next week's Parsha. Those dreams, meaning the latter ones, Yosef's, Paro's stewards, and Paro's, contained a message about the future of an individual or his nation, not a divine intercession on behalf of the righteous, right? That's those two aforementioned ones, Avimelech and Lavan being warned not to mess with the Abrahamic chain family. It's reasonable to posit, okay, now we get one of our next Rav Shalom assumption. It's reasonable to posit that Yaakov related his dreams, their meanings, and their outcomes to Yosef. The favorite son, heir apparent to the tradition, had every reason to believe that if he dreamt a dream where the message of the dream was obvious, that he should regard it as prophecy and the word of God, just as his father experienced. Okay, so we're at our next point. If we assume that Yosef Ben Zikuni means the child chosen to spend extra time with the parent, serve them in their old age, and along the way absorb most wholly their wisdom, values, tradition, and experiences. Um, then we could imagine that a feature of Yaakov's life, which were his dreams, are things he would have talked about with Yosef. And Yosef would have understood that if he dreams dreams that seem to be about, you know, this leadership or continuity, that he could take that as the word of God, right? Part of what's at play here, is going to develop this further, is what's the difference between a dream and a prophecy. We can now look through the first dream sequence and understand the different reactions of the brothers and Yaakov and what Yosef learned from them. Okay, we don't have to read the text again, um, although maybe we shall. He would want Rav Echelon would want us to, carrying the information we have now. Yosef dreamed a dream and he told it to his brothers, and they hated him yet the more. And he said to them, Hear now this dream which I dreamed, for behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and lo, my sheaf arose and also stood upright. And behold, your sheaves came round about and bowed down to my sheaf. And his brothers said to him, Will you indeed reign over us, or will you indeed have dominion over us? And they hated him yet the more for his dreams and for his words. And he dreamed yet another dream and told it to his brethren, and said, Behold, I have dreamed yet another dream. And behold, the sun and the moon and 11 stars bow down to me. And he told it to his father and to his brethren. And his father rebuked him and said to him, What is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall I and your mother and your brothers indeed come to bow down to you to the earth? And his brethren envied him, but his father kept the matter in mind. Okay, it doesn't automatically invite an entirely different reading. It's not that what Rav Echelon has argued for so far makes a new interpretation jump off the page. We'll hear how he wants to build it. It's clear from the preceding verses of this section that Yosef was engaged in a power struggle of sorts within the structure of the family. That's true, meaning preceding verses of this section, I think means both this passage that is quoted and even what comes before it. Yosef then experienced a dream with an obvious implication for that struggle and its seemingly divinely mandated outcome. He told the dream to his brothers, and they hated him even more just for telling them. He must have been confused by this, unless he wasn't aware of it. For why would they not be interested in hearing the word of God, especially as it affects them so directly? When he relates the dream of the sheaves, only to his brothers, his father does not hear of it. They understand its implication and berate him for it. What did they find so offensive about his vision? The verses do not indicate that the brothers disbelieved his dream, but that they were offended by it. The brothers had a piece of information that was not yet known to Yosef. Although their father Yaakov is a prophet, and his dreams are indeed visions from God, that is no longer the case with the next generation. Now, how he or where he gets this assumption that the brothers had this piece of information that Yosef didn't yet know, I'm not sure. If we see it in the article, let me know, because I didn't see the basis of this assumption. That although their father Yaakov is a prophet and his dreams are visions from God, that is no longer the case with the next generation. A dream may not necessarily be a vision. By vision, we mean prophecy. It may be the expression of subconscious desires and repressed urges, as conventional psychology maintains. The Talmud in Brachot records two incidents where the local non-Jewish governor challenged one of our sages to predict the content of the governor's dreams on the coming night. In each case, the sage described a detailed and horrific dream, which so preoccupied the governor that he dreamt about it that night. Right? Great trick. Predict my dreams. Oh, it's going to be this terrible dream. You're going to see, dark villains, blah, blah, blah. And then, sure enough, that's what the governor dreamt that night. An important distinction between a vision dream and a subconscious based dream is in interpretation. If the dream is truly a prophecy, its meaning should be fairly evident, as it is not generated by the person's own subconscious. We need not be privy to the psychological makeup of the dreamer to understand the message. A conventional dream, as we are all aware, may take a great deal of sophistication to understand, although that is not always the case. Again, we're getting into murky distinctions, you know, not easily discernible. The brothers were not offended by the dream. Rather, they were offended by the apparent cause of this dream. They believed that Yosef must be thinking about his takeover of the family so much that these thoughts had entered his dreams. Their
Yes.
derision and hatred is now clear. But why did they keep silent at the second dream? Okay, so again, so if we're basing ourselves, and this to me is the part that I get, I understand the least the derivation of his claims, the part where he says, although their father Yaakov is a prophet and his dreams are visions from God, that's no longer the case with the next generation. A dream may not necessarily be a vision. If they know that, if that's true, and they know that, and Yosef doesn't know it, then we can imagine that they are interpreting that first dream that he's telling them as not a message from God, but as an indication that he's obsessing over the takeover of the family, over the vision of him as the leader of the family, certainly of the brothers. And if that's the case, that upsets them deeply because they feel that that's not coming from God, but that's him, you know, getting self-centered and out of control. But if that's the case, why don't they have that same reaction when the second dream comes? That's Rav Echelon's next question. Evidently, here's the big evidently. Evidently, there was a tradition in the house of Jacob that although a single dream may be caused by internal thoughts and ruminations, if the same dream or the same message clothed in alternate symbolism occurs twice, it is no longer a happenstance. It is truly God's word.
Yes.
Here's the linchpin for the basis of this, which at least the source of it is clear. Whether we can understand it as a Jacobian tradition is another question. We find this approach explicitly stated by Yosef when he explains Paro's doubled dream. This is in the beginning of Miketz. Um, and for that the dream was doubled unto Paro twice, it is because the thing is established by God, and God will shortly bring it to pass. We have that, I think, here. Just I don't have the Hebrew totally at my fingertips, so here it is. V'al hishanot hachalom el paro pa'amayim, ki nachon hadavar me'im ha'elokim, u'memaher ha'elokim la'asoto. Okay, so we're going to see that everything is built on this assumption, and all Rav Echelon is able to say is, given that we see Yosef say this all the way at the end in Miketz, we can assume that this is something he's known all along, the family has known all along, and this is like an accepted, principle of dream versus prophecy discernment in the house of Yaakov. We only find out about it the third time Yosef is involved in dreams, but it must be the case, and we can then retroject that all the way back to even his brother's experience of his second dream in the beginning of our parsha. And so now he explains. When Yosef reported his second dream to the brothers, they didn't increase their hatred at either the report of the dream or at the retelling of its content. The fact of the second dream and its similar implication was no longer reason for hatred, but rather for concern and jealousy. Meaning now the brother's interpretation is not, oh, Yosef's obsessing over, ascending to the primary brother role in the family, and that's so arrogant of him, and that makes us really mad. When they hear the second dream, then they say, oh, this must mean that this is really from God. And so we're not angry at Yosef, we're jealous of him, and we're concerned. Yaakov, however, had heard nothing about the first dream. That's why he, upon hearing about Yosef's second dream, responded in an almost identical fashion as the brothers did to the first dream. For
Ah,
him,
okay.
this is the first dream. What is this dream you had? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you? Right? So you can see how he's able to now fit the pieces of the puzzle that he has raised into a coherent, unit, but it's so hard to, he hasn't provided us with any tools to develop this reading ourselves, I would say, because he's choosing which details to highlight and what that and the key to the whole thing is this comment of Yosef to Paro in the beginning of the next parsha about doubling being essential. Again, it's not that this isn't a completely plausible explanation. It accounts for lots of curious details. It just doesn't seem obvious. But the challenge always is, okay, well, what other hypothesis do we want to develop to fit these different details? Because they are all good questions. At this point, back to the text. Yaakov surely expected his other sons to have a similar reaction. right? He's all bent out of shape. Is everyone going to come bow down to you? But they were silent. As we see from the incident in Shechem, last week's Parsha, these sons were not shy about speaking up in their father's presence. Their silence here is telling. After his rebuke, the Torah tells us that his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. Yaakov must have been surprised by the brothers' silence and must have figured that this dream was not the first one Yosef had shared. Again, no way to know that from the text, but he wants to infer, again, from the fact that Yaakov, instead of sticking with his irritated, dismissive response, keeps the matter in mind, and that the only difference, that's explicit in the text that could explain that is seeing the brother's silence or the juxtaposition of the brother's silence. Aved wants to assume that that brother's silence makes Yaakov think maybe he's been missing something. Maybe he's missing that this isn't the first dream, and therefore he has to take it more seriously. Yosef learned a powerful lesson from this encounter. Even if a dream is just a dream and not prophecy, this is only true when it is an isolated incident. When the dream is repeated, this is a sign from God and must be understood in that way. Right? So it seems like Rav Echelon is positing that that's the piece going all the way back when he says the brothers had a piece of information that was not yet known to Joseph, although their father Yaakov is a prophet and his dreams are indeed visions of God. That is no longer the case with the next generation. I think he means to go all the way on to the point of, you know, the the repetition of a dream makes clear that it is a prophecy and not just a dream, and that somehow that's something that the brothers already knew, and Yosef is only inferring it from their response to his telling them about the second dream. Again, no way to verify the likelihood of this reading or not, but it's clever, and it makes good use of a lot of the individual questions and discrepancies in the text. We can now return to Yosef in the Egyptian prison and explain his response to the butler and the baker, right? So now we've come back to our all the way original question. When did Yosef shift from being a dreamer to a dream interpreter? Well, after he watched his brother's response to his two dreams, he started to then learn about, you know, what dreams might be meaning, and especially this core notion about repeated dreams. When he learned that they had both experienced significant and terrifying dreams in the same night, he understood that these were more than dreams. He reasoned that just like a dream that occurs twice to the same person is more than a dream, similarly, if two men sharing a fate have impactful dreams on the same night, their dreams must be divine messages, right? And they had said to him, if we look back, um, they said to him, "We have dreamed a dream, and there is none that can interpret it." And so, it's a strange Hebrew, two people speaking about an individual thing. But we can understand that Yosef understands that they both dreamed a dream, and that it seems like then two different dreams, but that are of a piece, and that tips him off. So picking back up where we were, his response, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell them to me now," is not presumptuous. He was telling them that their dreams were more than just dreams. They were in the province of God, and as such, would not need sophisticated interpretation, as is the case with a subconscious-based dream, right? What he's saying to them is when it's a double dream, it means it's not a whole psychological thing. It means it's a message from God more clearly coming from the outside and not the product of your own subconscious, and therefore, it should be more straightforward. Again, another assumption that the subconscious dreams are more complex and the messages from God are more straightforward. Maybe not always the case, but maybe a reasonable assumption. The dreams would be fairly easy to understand, as indeed they were. Yosef earned his reputation as an interpreter of dreams, and his ultimate freedom and final rise to power, not by interpreting dreams at all. He earned it by remembering a lesson from his father's house that the doubled dream is a mark of prophecy, and by applying it intelligently years later in the Egyptian dungeon. right? So the once he remembers that and says, okay, it's a double dream, tell it to me, and offers a fairly straightforward interpretation of it, that then launches his fame as a dream interpreter, causing the butler to remember him and eventually forget him and then remember him to Paro, causing him to be brought out of prison, causing him to then hear Paro's doubled dream and be able to offer a similar kind of fairly straightforward interpretation. Now, again, it's people could look at that dream and offer different interpretations. Certainly, Rashi comments about Paro's dreams that it took many interpretations that he didn't like. So clearly, there was a range of interpretations. Maybe those were biased by wanting to be show favor to Paro, um, but and the argument that they must have been straightforward isn't an ironclad argument. Much of what may seem new in this explanation was achieved simply, I would dispute the claim simply, by applying the first component of our methodology, always keeping an eye on each actor as an independent character. What did Yosef know? What did his father know? What did the brothers know? Right? In particular, remember pointing out, um, that the brothers knew both dreams, but his father only knew the first. Um, that Yosef knew, again, an assumption that the brothers knew this tradition of double dreams and Yosef didn't. That seems the hardest to buy, especially if he's already made the claim that Yosef spent much more time with Yaakov, inheriting his messages and his experiences than the other brothers. That to me feels like the weakest link in this interpretation. It's clear from the odd reactions at the beginning of the story that there's a subtle shift going on between the lines of what we are told. We only discover the reason for that in Yosef's explicit words to Paro regarding the significance of a doubled dream. Again, certainly what you know broadly this also accounts for and sort of you know adds some coherence to is this notion about these pairs of dreams that come throughout these parshiot in the second half of Bereshit. Um, but that could be accounted for in some other way. I don't know off the top of my head what it might be, but yeah. So I think it's a fascinating take. Um, it's a good way of accounting for all the data, but it's hard that it certainly has its own questions and challenges. And open it up for any of your thoughts or reactions. Lance, you
Mhm.
got it.
Okay, okay. The real question I have here is what is a character? That's one of the key words in this whole essay. And it seems to me that number one, it's if this essay were given to yeshiva bochers, I don't think they would be thrilled with the idea of calling Jacob a character. However, my take is that we tend to assume that the name of a character means the same thing throughout. In other words, that instead of having Jacob, for example, as a single character, what if Jacob actually were many different characters? And what we're getting together is stories that are stitched together as though they were one. But in many cases, it doesn't make sense. Just as this doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense, for example, that Abraham welcomes the strangers and kicks out Hagar. Makes no sense. It doesn't make sense that Elisha, the prophet, attacks children and regenerates one. It doesn't make sense to me, at least. And the thing that amuses me the most is I saw a show a while ago about archaeology. The archaeologists were thrilled because they found a sign that said David, and they immediately assumed that it referred to King David. Does that mean that no one else at the time was named David? I mean, isn't that a preposterous concept? And I mean, the real problem here is the fundamental. Roland Barthes has an essay that I love called The Death of the Author. And the point of the essay is that the death of the author has intent in concepts that we're talking about in this essay. But Roland Barthes says no, that we don't know what the intent is. The intent is really irrelevant. But what happens is the death of the author results in the birth of the reader. And what we're seeing here is the birth of the reader. And you one thing, you're reading it, he's reading it, I'm reading it, everybody else in this Zoom meeting is reading it, and many of us have very different readings. Now, are you right? Am I right? Is everybody right? Or is everybody wrong? I don't know. But I would refer you to Kohelet. What is Kohelet's attitude toward wisdom?
You tell me.
Vanity, worthless, fleeting breaths. Oops. That
Well,
That
undermines and
is,
subverts everything we do, including what I do.
right,
it can be
Um,
correct.
right. Yeah. Great. Yes, I appreciate the reflection, especially on characters and on complexity of characters and yeah, food for thought. Thank you. Other thoughts?
Yeah. Um,
Go ahead.
Seems like Joseph interpreted his own dream. How wise is it? Like a doctor doesn't give himself, a examination. A lawyer doesn't rep himself when he has to go to court. So why would somebody who dreams something interpret his own dream? That's
Does he interpret his own dream? It's a little, I mean, he says he describes his dream. I think he's quite circumspect here. He says, I dreamed a dream, and all your sheaves were surrounding mine, and they bowed down to mine. And then the second dream was sun, moon, and stars were bowing down to me. He doesn't say, and therefore you can see that I'm going to rule over you. He leaves that to the brothers to kind of, and then to his father to question, challenge. I think I agree with you. I think Yosef agrees with you. He knows that it's dicey to offer the interpretation. So he just leaves it at the dream description. But one of the things that's interesting also that Rav Echelon, I don't think totally he tries to explain is why it is that um, it first says Yosef dreamed a dream and he told it to his brothers and they hated him the more. And then he told them what he dreamt and they hated him even more. It's unclear to me if this is an example where the Torah gives a topic sentence and then spells it out. In other words, are these two different things? Yosef dreamed a dream, told it to his brothers, and they hated him even more. Is that separate from? And he said to them, "Here's the dream, the sheaves, etc." And then them saying, "Will you reign over us?" And they hated him the more for his dreams and for his words. Are those two separate sequential actions? Rav Echelon seems to read that they are, and that the very fact of his dreaming irritated them, and then the content of the dream even more. Um, it's not totally clear to me that it has to be read that way. It's unusual to have a topic sentence and then the whole story is told in only three more sentences. But I think that might be going on here. But I think it's exactly. I think it's intentionally that he doesn't offer the interpretation for the reason that you said. Yeah, Joan?
Well, I don't know the Hebrew, but where it says that Yaakov kept it in mind, and I believe you interpreted that he wanted to see what would happen. But as a parent, I also took it as Yaakov would realize that this could cause tremendous acrimony as it did in the family.
Yes. Yes. It's an ambiguous phrase. The Hebrew is shamaret hadavar, um, preserved or kept the thing. The term davar, by the way, seems to be a very important um, root word in this first chapter, even going back before of this story, even going back before the dreams. It says, lo yachlu dabaro shalom. They couldn't speak well of him, and even just a little bit later, after the brothers are out shepherding their sheep, and Yaakov sends Yosef out to them. And he says to him, Hashiveni, says to Yosef, Hashiveni davar, bring back a word, a matter. And Judy Klitzner has a beautiful reading about this, the notion of speech between the brothers throughout the story and relates back, I think, to the frequency of this term davar. So shamara ta davar, it's not clear exactly what it is he's keeping to himself. But it does seem like there is an intentional, it might mean Yaakov himself is waiting to see what will happen, or it might mean more, as you're suggesting, Joan, kind of like kept that close to the chest so as not to further inflame the tensions between the brothers.
Well, I actually meant something a little different, which was
Okay, good. Say more.
uh, no, that Yaakov as a parent, he said it, he didn't want to inflame, but also that he was worried about this. He kept it in mind. You see, I have two grandsons, and I keep it in mind. What's going to happen here now?
Mm-hmm.
That's what I,
Mm-hmm. Like kept an eye on it, kept tabs on the matter.
well, just worried about it. He could see that there was an issue here,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
how might it result?
Yes. Yes. And I think one of the tensions with Yaakov in this Shamara Tadavar, you know, he kept tabs and but maybe he was too passive. I think the text could be criticizing his passivity. Um,
What maybe
just letting it play out how it's going to play out. And then of course he intervenes in a sense, in a sort of active passive way in sending Yosef to his brothers where they're shepherding. We had a wonderful lunch guest, Jonathan Meyer, pastor of Verdalian, who comes back to visit from time to time, and um, and he told us that he was just fretting over this action of Yaakov in the Parsha this year as he was circling back to it. Just how could he have sent him Yosef off to the brothers, knowing,
Knowing, yeah.
the great tensions between them? Like, was he just, you know, um, blindly hoping that there was going to be some reconciliation? Did he feel Yosef needed to face this and grow up? But like,
Yeah.
how irresponsible to
Yes.
send him out there. He was really wrestling with it. So the Shamaret Hadavar, when did he just keep an eye on things and when did he intervene? I think is another interesting theme in Yaakov's parenting for sure of these.
Uh, I
creative.
have an ancillary question to this.
Yes, Peter,
How
please.
much education did you mention before education of Yaakov? Uh, what was that education actually? I mean, the Torah was not given yet, and where would that education be coming from? What was the
Yeah.
content?
Yes, yes. It's an excellent question. The Midrashic tradition assumes that the patriarch, not all of the Midrashic tradition. There is a strong strand of the Midrashic tradition which assumes that the patriarchs and matriarchs kept the Torah, and so and there's um, an amazing line in the Gemara that I recently came across. Can't remember if it was right to this point or something else. It was asking about how did I have to check. How did one of the figures, I don't know if it was one of the patriarchs, like know a certain thing? And it sort of offered like, was it intuitive? Was it, from his teacher or was it from God? And kind of these fascinating take on three sources of knowledge. And or maybe was it from his ex own experience? Was it from his teacher or was it from God? But I don't think it related to this actually, the more I try to remember it. But the assumption is that patriarchs and matriarchs somehow already had. Again, I don't know whether it was intuitive or transmitted
Intuitive,
proto sense of what the commandments were.
right?
It's a fanciful midrashic idea, but it's a strong tradition. But they do then imagine that Avraham had whatever it was, and it seems, or even going back, Shem and Aver come before Avraham. That there is that even from the time of a few generations after Noach some of this is known and it is being passed down through these study
But
halls.
is there even a aleph base alphabet? I mean, from archaeology, it's known that that was established in Egypt, time of Moshe,
Yes,
who kind of established the somewhat preliminary alphabet,
right.
aleph base.
Yeah,
So how could the knowledge be except by Shel Pei?
right.
There was
Oh,
no
yes.
written.
Yes, I think it's reasonable to assume that it was an oral tradition, but
Yeah.
that doesn't stop it from being studied,
Yes, that's
even
true.
going all the way forward to the times of the Mishnah and the Gemara, we seem to understand that, a lot of this was done orally with people reciting Brightot and then analyzing them and discussing them. So
Yeah. Okay. That
yeah,
makes sense.
yeah, yeah,
Thank
great.
you.
I see Moshe again, and then we can come back to Lance before any final
Okay.
thoughts.
Um, I just want to know. I mean, this is from last week's Parsha. Whatever happened to Dina? She just seems like she drops off.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean,
Like
I don't want to sound gross. Did she have a child from the rape?
right,
Did she marry? Did
I
was she,
cannot.
you know,
right.
was she accepted back into the, fold?
Yeah,
Should I
good
go?
We
question.
want to know.
Good question. I don't know of any continuing textual tradition in the Torah about it. Um, and I don't know
Must
what
be
the Midrashic
midrash.
tradition has to say about it. I'm just taking a quick um,
I can fill in what I found out.
okay,
It,
please, Peter.
and I asked Rebbe Chat GPT, since I don't have access to a real
So,
that quickly. But it's basically Dina had a child, as Moshe mentioned, by name of I think Akenat or something like that, who was given away to Potiphar's household. I don't know how that happened, but somehow she was given away. So, and then Joseph actually marries her and has his two sons, Ephraim and Menashe, from her.
Wow.
But then what happens
Wow.
to Dinah? It just kills me not knowing whether Dinah actually went to his household, which, by the way, the archaeology points out that Joseph, once he becomes a vizier, he had like a big house in Goshen, which was actually excavated, and maybe she lived with him and her daughter. That was just I would love to know. It drives me crazy not actually knowing. Then what happens to Dina?
Right. I mean, the end of the story in chapter 34, verse 26, after the massacre of Shechem,
Yes,
says that they killed Hamor and Shechem, his son, by the sword. Vayikchu et Dina mi beit Shechem vayetzeyu. They took Dina from the house of Shechem and they went out. So
yes.
she seems to have been brought back to the family. What happens to her afterwards? I don't see. I was just doing a quick concordance search. I don't see that her name even comes up again after um
And
after
I also heard that Dina was married to one of the sons, married one of the Yaakov's sons, and it seems a little preposterous, but not impossible in
right,
Egypt, especially.
right. She is listed. The last mention is in chapter 46 when she's listed amongst those who went down to Egypt. So,
Yes, she
you
did
know,
get there.
yeah.
Did she find her daughter? Did she meet with these
Mm,
are things that are so unknown, but you
yeah.
know, I would love to know.
Yes, the
so you say,
richness of the stories, but they're incomplete so often.
so you're saying
Yeah.
that Dina's daughter married Joseph?
That's a midrashic tradition, meaning we're told that
Yes.
Yosef marries a woman named Asnat bat Potifera, and apparently the midrash suggests, or a midrashic tradition suggests that this child was born to Potifera, um,
Was
with
taken to Potiphar.
right, was taken to Potifera, was
Yeah.
Tina's
I'd
child who
like to
was
make
adopted by Potifera. Yeah, Joan?
like to make a point, which to me it just shows that we're dealing with a very patriarchal. The fact that we don't know about it and you can make up all these things, but we're dealing with a very patriarchal situation where they don't really care. And I'll leave it at that.
And I know there was a book, a modern novel written on a topic. I think it's called The Red Tent or something
Yes,
like that.
yes, Anita Diamond's book. Yes, yes.
And I read it a long time ago, but I
Yes,
think I need to reread that. At least it fills this void,
yes,
which
yes.
my Torah doesn't seem to want to cover at
Yes,
all.
yes, yes, yes. Great. Lance, go ahead.
What is the Hebrew word for mind in this text?
a good question.
Mind.
Is translated as mind, but
Oh,
I can't.
in
I
the
don't have the
phrase
text.
kept the matter in mind?
No, in
That
the phrase, yes, when Jacob keeps the matter in
yes.
mind.
So it's shamarat hadavar, which means kept the thing. In mind is a sort of parenthetical extension to the verb lishmor, when it says lishmor and no, let's say it this way, because I'll try to say it this way. Normally, lishmor means normally. In a lot of cases, lishmor means to keep an object, right? To keep an object in your possession and watch it. Um, in rabbinic law, the four kinds of people who keep an eye on objects, are called the arba shomrim. So it typically means to keep an object, but the davar here seems to be an abstract thing, whether it's the dream, the reaction to the dream, the conflict between the brothers, that's the davar. So when the verb shomer comes to mean not keep a physical object in your physical possession, but keep an abstract object, I think that's when the translation then comes to fill. Where are you keeping it? If it's not real, if it's not concrete, you're keeping it in mind. So it's an extended
In inference.
translation interpretation of the verb lishmor here to mean keep in mind, because the direct object that it takes is an incorporeal thing.
Where is the later reference to this event?
I don't know. Where?
Is there one?
Well,
In other words, it says Jacob, 10 chapters later, Jacob remembered this
right.
dream.
So I could hypothesize, I could hypothesize that that's the clue when Yaakov sends Yosef not long after out to his brothers and says, Hashiveni davar, bring a matter back to me. Maybe it's connecting those two, and maybe it's actually saying he then surfaced the matter and he sent Yosef out to deal with the matter. But that's a complete, personal midrashic conjecture. I don't know that the text ever explicitly refers back to Yaakov's memory of this thing.
But my only point would be that we make assumptions, making a blank out of you and me, from The Odd Couple. But we do that, and we make the assumption that this line is actually connected to the story. In other words, we don't know whether it was added on later on, just stuck in there by some scribe somewhere. And there are millions of contradictions. I think Rabbi Zev Farber is aware of these and accepts these. And I don't think too many rabbinic uh, commentators understand that there are contradictions that you cannot get rid of,
Mm.
no matter what you do.
It's shum davar.
Yes, fair, fair,
Ask him.
fair.
I have to disagree with Lance because the text is the text such as it is, and that's what we're analyzing, Lance. I understand your point.
Not if you're a Shakespeare scholar.
Well, I am.
All
You
right,
are?
we'll leave this back and forth for offline at 9:31. And
Okay.
Doesn't
Very
Joseph remember
interesting.
his dream?
What's that, James?
Joseph, I think, re
Yes,
recalls the dream when the brothers are in his house having the
yes,
meal,
yes.
and he wants to cry it and reveal himself, but then he says he remembers the
Mm-hmm.
dream.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. 100%. Yep. That's here. Uh, when the brothers come down, it says Yosef recognized his brothers. They didn't remember him. Vayizkor Yosef et hachalamot asher chalam lahem. He remembers the dreams which he dreamt about them. It's a fascinating little preposition here. Um, yeah, and he deals with them harshly in that initial reaction. Why do you bring it up? Just to pointing
Well,
out that Yosef resurfaces them, even if we don't have a
oh,
reference to Yaakov.
I see. The question was specifically about Yaakov
Yeah,
remembering the
yeah, I think
dreams.
so. I think so. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. Good
Very
to once
interesting
again.
again.
Yep. Great to be together. These
Thank
experts
you.
are amazing. Love them
Good
all.
night.
Good night to all.
Good night, Lila Tov.
So